The Keller Experiment, a story by Carl Otto. Dr. James Keller hunched over his microscope, eyes strained from hours of focus. The lab hummed softly, contrasting the silence of Horizon Enterprises at 9:47 p.m. Time had lost meaning for Keller. He straightened, rubbing his eyes. The gene sequence on screen was tantalizingly close to perfection. Years of research and countless experiments had led to this moment. Just one more tweak, he muttered, fingers flying over the keyboard. His gaze drifted to an envelope on his desk. Concert tickets for his daughter's birthday peeked out, offering a brief smile amidst his work. "You're doing this for her," he reminded himself. "For a better world. A world without genetic disorders." His mind wandered back to the board meeting earlier that week, the memory making his jaw clench. "Dr. Keller, we need results," CO Victoria Reeves said, her steely gaze fixed on him. "The board is growing impatient." Keller fought to keep his voice level. "Ms. Reeves, we're fundamentally altering human DNA. This isn't something we can rush." "We're aware of the implications, James," Reeves replied, "but our investors need progress. Imagine the potential, eradicating genetic diseases, enhancing human capabilities. It's about reshaping humanity's future." Dr. Simmons, head of ethics, interjected. "We must consider the societal impact. Who gets access? How do we prevent a genetic underclass?" Reeves dismissed his concerns. "Those are issues for later. Right now, we need to prove the concept is viable before our competitors beat us to it." Keller sighed. "I understand the pressure, but we're optimizing the entire human genome. The slightest miscalculation could be catastrophic." "That's why we hired you," Reeves leaned forward. "We need a practical demonstration, not just theories." 2 weeks, Keller said finally. "I'll have something tangible by then." Reeves nodded. "Don't disappoint us. And remember, discretion is paramount." As the meeting adjourned, Keller felt he was standing on the precipice of something monumental and terrifying. He glanced at his calendar, 1 week until the deadline, 3 until the music festival. The pressure was mounting. On one side, the weight of scientific responsibility and ethical considerations. On the other, the relentless push of corporate ambition and the promise of reshaping human evolution itself. And caught in the middle, a man driven by his own brilliance and the desperate need to prove himself. Keller turned back to his microscope, the gene sequences dancing before his eyes. He was so close to a breakthrough, he could almost taste it. But at what cost? The question lingered, unanswered, as he dove back into his work, the ticking clock a constant reminder of the looming deadline. "You're not good enough," a voice whispered in the back of his mind. "You'll never meet their expectations. You're going to fail, and everyone will know it." Keller shook his head, trying to silence the intrusive thoughts. They had been getting louder lately, harder to ignore. He reached for his coffee mug, hand trembling slightly. A knock at the lab door startled him from his thoughts. Dr. Jan Cook, his research partner, stood in the doorway, a concerned look on her face. "James, it's nearly 10 p.m. You should go home, get some rest." Keller shook his head. "Can't. Not when we're this close." Jan stepped into the lab, her eyes scanning the data on Keller's screen. "I know you believe in this project, but don't overwork yourself. We need you at your best." "I'll be fine, Jan," Keller assured her, though his exhaustion was evident. Jan's expression softened. "Just promise me you'll be careful. We're playing with fire here." As Jan left, Keller turned back to his work, her words echoing in his mind. He knew she was right to be cautious, but he couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the brink of something revolutionary. Hours passed, and the first rays of dawn were just beginning to peek through the lab windows when Keller sat back, a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration coursing through him. He'd done it. The gene sequence was complete, at least in theory. He stared at the vial of clear liquid on his desk, the physical manifestation of years of work. All it needed now was a human trial. Keller's mind raced. The proper channels for human trials would take months, if not years. Reeves and the board wanted results now. And deep down, a part of him that he wasn't entirely comfortable acknowledging wanted to be the first. To experience the next step in human evolution firsthand. Do it, the voice urged. Prove them all wrong. Show them what you're capable of. Before he could talk himself out of it, Keller grabbed a syringe. His hands shook slightly as he filled it with the gene therapy solution. He rolled up his sleeve, found a vein, and took a deep breath. For science, he muttered and plunged the needle into his arm. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a warmth began to spread from the injection site, racing through his veins like liquid fire. He gasped, gripping the edge of his desk as wave after wave of sensation washed over him. His vision blurred, then sharpened to crystal clarity. Sounds he'd never noticed before suddenly became distinct. As the initial rush faded, Keller stood, marveling at how light he felt. He walked across the lab, his movements fluid and precise. On a whim, he effortlessly lifted a heavy piece of equipment with one hand. A laugh bubbled up from his chest, a sound of pure amazement. He'd done it. He'd actually done it. Keller rushed to his computer, documenting his experiences. His mind felt sharper, clearer than ever before. Ideas and connections that had eluded him for years suddenly seemed obvious. As the sun rose, Dr. James Keller sat back, a smile of triumph on his face. He'd taken the first step into a new era of human evolution. The possibilities seemed endless. But even as he reveled in his success, a small voice whispered a warning. He pushed it aside, too caught up in the euphoria to heed the caution. What have you done? The voice whispered. What have you unleashed? The alarm clock's shrill beeping pierced through Dr. James Keller's fitful sleep. He groaned, his body aching in ways he couldn't quite understand. As he reached to silence the alarm, he noticed with horror that his fingernails had grown into sharp points overnight. What's happening to me? He thought, panic rising in his chest. James? His wife, Emily, called from downstairs. Are you up? We need to leave for Sarah's party in an hour. Keller's heart sank. Sarah, his daughter's birthday. How could he have forgotten? I'll be down in a minute, he called back, his voice rough. In the bathroom, Keller stared at his reflection. Dark circles ringed his eyes, which seemed to flash with an unnatural light. He fumbled for the nail clippers, wincing as he trimmed back the claw-like nails. Just get through today, he told himself. For Sarah. You're losing control, another voice whispered in his mind. You're a danger to everyone around you. Keller shook his head, trying to silence the intrusive thoughts. They had been getting louder lately, harder to ignore. Downstairs, Emily was putting the finishing touches on a colorful birthday cake. Her smile faltered as she saw Keller. James, you look terrible. Are you sure you're feeling up to this? Keller forced a smile. I'm fine. Just been working late. Liar, the voice in his head hissed. You're falling apart, and you know it. Emily's brow furrowed with concern. You've been working late, a lot recently. Sarah's really missed you, you know. Guilt knotted Keller's insides. I know. I'm sorry. I'll make it up to her, I promise. The birthday party was a whirlwind of noise and color that set Keller's enhanced senses on edge. Every shriek of laughter, every pop of a balloon made him flinch. The smell of the cake, once enticing, now turned his stomach. As Sarah blew out her candles, Keller felt a familiar tingling under his skin. No, not now. Please, not now. He excused himself, rushing to the bathroom where he gripped the sink, knuckles white, willing the change away. You're losing it, the voice taunted. Soon, you won't be able to hide what you've become. When he returned, the party was winding down. Sarah ran up to him, her face alight with joy. Dad, did you see me blow out all the candles? Did you like my wish? Keller's heart broke. He'd missed it. I'm sorry, sweetheart. I wasn't feeling well. But I'm sure your wish was perfect. Sarah's smile dimmed. Oh, okay. Mom said you got me concert tickets. Can we still go? Keller knelt down, pulling his daughter into a hug. Of course we can. I wouldn't miss it for the world. As he held her, Keller silently prayed he could keep that promise. But deep down, he knew he was making a vow he might not be able to keep. The following week at Horizon Enterprises was a study in paranoia. Keller jumped at every sound, avoided his colleagues, and spent most of his time locked in his lab, desperately searching for a way to reverse the changes overtaking his body. You're spiraling, the voice in his head observed. How long before someone notices? Dr. Jan Cook stood outside Keller's lab, her hand hovering over the door. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for the conversation ahead. As the senior ethicist on the project, she felt a deep responsibility not just to the research, but to the people involved. Keller had been more than a colleague, he'd been a friend and a scientific partner for years. His recent behavior had her deeply worried. She knocked firmly. After a long pause, the door opened, revealing Keller's haggard face. James, we need to talk, Jan said, her voice a mixture of concern and determination. You've been acting strange for weeks. What's going on? Keller's eyes darted nervously. It's nothing, Jan, just stressed about the projects. Jan stepped into the lab, closing the door behind her. Don't lie to me, James. We've known each other too long for that. She glanced at the disarray of the lab, so unlike Keller's usual meticulous organization. This isn't just stress. I saw the results of your last test sample. That DNA. It's like nothing I've ever seen. What have you done? A wave of panic washed over Keller. She knew, or at least she suspected. Jan continued, her voice softening. James, I know you believe in this project, but I'm worried about the immediate risks. We're moving too fast. What if there are unforeseen side effects? Long-term consequences we can't predict? Keller sighed, running a hand through his hair. I've considered that, Jan, but think of the potential benefits. The lives we could save, the suffering we could prevent. I know your intentions are good, Jan replied, but this isn't just about the end result. It's about the process. We have a responsibility to ensure our methods are ethical and safe. Are you sure you're not letting the pressure from Reeves and the board cloud your judgment? You don't understand, Keller growled, his voice deepening unnaturally. We don't have time for protocols. Reeves and the board want results now. Jan's eyes widened in realization. You've already done it, haven't you? You've tested it on yourself. She stepped closer, her voice urgent. James, this is exactly why we have ethical guidelines. The pressure from the top doesn't justify. Before she could finish, a surge of aggression overtook Keller. He grabbed Jan's arm, yanking her further into the lab and slamming the door. You can't tell anyone, he snarled, his grip tightening. Jan winced in pain, fear creeping into her voice. James, you're hurting me. This isn't you. Whatever's happening, we can fix it, but you have to let me help. Keller's eyes flashed with an inhuman light. No one can know. No one can stop this. It's too important. As Jan watched in horror, Keller's form began to shift and change before her eyes. Her scientific curiosity warred with terror as she realized the full implications of what Keller had done. "Oh, James," she whispered, "what have you done to yourself?" Jan's eyes widened in fear. "James, you're hurting me. What's happening to you?" Keller could feel his control slipping. The beast inside roared to life, demanding release. He tried to let go of Jan, to warn her to run, but his body wouldn't obey. "Stop," his human side pleaded. "This isn't you." "This is exactly who you are now," the darker voice countered. "Embrace it." What happened next was a blur of violence and terror. When Keller came to his senses, the lab was in shambles. Equipment lay broken on the floor, papers scattered everywhere. And Jan, Keller's heart stopped as he saw her crumpled form in the corner. Blood pooled beneath her head where it had struck the edge of a lab bench. Her eyes stared sightlessly at the ceiling. "No," Keller whispered, stumbling back. "No, no, no. Jan, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." "You're a monster," the voice in his head said. "A killer." The sound of approaching footsteps snapped Keller back to reality. Panic surged through him, clearing the fog of shock. He had to run, but he couldn't leave empty-handed. His work, his research, it was the cause of all this, but it might also be his only hope for a cure. With trembling hands, Keller grabbed a handful of research notes, stuffing them haphazardly into his bag. He snatched several vials of his blood samples from the centrifuge, nearly dropping them in his haste. Each one contained the key to his transformation, and possibly his salvation. As the footsteps grew louder, Keller's enhanced hearing picked up voices. Security guards, drawn by the commotion. They were almost at the lab door. "Dr. Keller? Dr. Cook? Is everything all right in there?" Keller's eyes darted around the room, looking for an escape route. The window. It was his only chance. He rushed towards it, his inhuman strength making quick work of the lock. Just as the lab door began to open, Keller leapt out into the night. The cool air hit him like a slap, a stark contrast to the stuffy lab. He landed with cat-like grace 3 stories below, barely feeling the impact. "Hey, stop right there," a voice shouted from above. But Keller was already running, his enhanced physiology propelling him forward at impossible speeds. Streets and buildings blurred past as he fled, leaving behind the body of his colleague and friend, along with the last remnants of his normal life. As he ran, the voice in his head continued its relentless assault. "Murderer. Monster. There's no going back now." Keller tried to shut it out, focusing instead on his ragged breathing, the pounding of his heart. But deep down, he knew the voice was right. He had crossed a line tonight, one that could never be uncrossed. He ran until the city lights faded behind him, until his lungs burned and his legs trembled. Only then did he allow himself to slow, collapsing in a secluded alley miles from the lab. As the adrenaline faded, the full weight of what he'd done crashed over him. Jan was dead, by his hand, and now he was a fugitive, a monster hiding in the shadows. Keller curled in on himself, his body racked with sobs. "What have I become?" he thought, staring at his hands. "What kind of monster am I?" With shaking hands, Keller gathered his scattered thoughts. He couldn't go home, couldn't risk endangering his family. But he needed a place to work, to think. As he stood, a plan began to form. He would find somewhere secluded, somewhere he could continue his research without risking anyone else's safety. And then, one way or another, he would put an end to the monster he had created. The beast within him stirred, as if sensing his intentions. But Keller pushed it down, clinging to the last shreds of his humanity. He had to believe there was still hope. The alternative was too horrifying to contemplate. With one last look back towards the city he was leaving behind, Dr. James Keller disappeared into the night, a man on the run from the law, from his own creation, and from the terrifying future he had unleashed. Keller huddled in a dingy motel room, his mind racing. The TV droned in the background, but he barely registered it until he heard a familiar name. Pop sensation Aria Moon's upcoming performance at the Summer Music Festival. Keller's head snapped up. The festival. The tickets. Sarah. For a moment, he allowed himself to imagine it, attending the concert with his daughter, being a normal father again. But as another wave of pain racked his body, the dream shattered. You can never go back, the voice said. You're too far gone. But maybe he could see them one last time. From a distance. Say a silent goodbye to the life he'd lost. As night fell, Keller slipped out of the motel, his decision made. He would go to the festival. He would see his family one last time. And then he would find a way to end this before he could hurt anyone else. You're fooling yourself, the voice sneered. You know how this ends. The stage was set for a confrontation that would determine not just Keller's fate, but potentially the future of human evolution itself. And through it all, the voice in Keller's head grew louder, more insistent, blurring the lines between man and beast until he could no longer tell where one ended and the other began. The Summer Music Festival pulsed with life, a sea of bodies moving to the rhythm of blaring speakers. Dr. James Keller moved through the crowd like a ghost, his enhanced senses overwhelmed by the cacophony of sounds, smells, and motion. Every beat of music, every brush of a stranger's shoulder threatened to trigger a transformation. You don't belong here, the voice in his head hissed. You're a monster. A freak. Keller gritted his teeth, fighting back against the intrusive thoughts. His eyes scanned the crowd desperately, searching for the faces he both longed and dreaded to see. Then suddenly, he spotted them, Emily and Sarah, his wife and daughter, standing near the main stage. Sarah sat atop Emily's shoulders, her small hands waving a glow stick in time with the music. Even from a distance, Keller could see the joy on their faces. His heart clenched with a mixture of love and anguish. They looked so happy, so normal. Everything he could no longer be. Sarah's laughter carried to him over the din of the crowd, and for a moment, Keller forgot the monster he had become. He took an unconscious step forward, drawn by an overwhelming urge to join them, to pretend for just one moment that everything was as it should be. Go to them, a part of him urged. Tell them everything. They'll understand. They'll help you. But then Sarah turned, her eyes sweeping the crowd, and Keller froze. What if she saw him? What if she called out to him? The thought of his daughter seeing him like this, of the fear that would inevitably fill her eyes, was unbearable. They'll never understand, the darker voice countered. They'll fear you, hate you. You're better off alone. As if sensing his thoughts, the beast within him stirred. Keller felt the familiar tingling beneath his skin, the first warning signs of an impending transformation. Panic rose in his throat. No, not here. Not now. Not with them so close. He pushed through the crowd, desperate to put distance between himself and his family. His breath came in ragged gasps as he fought against the change, each step a battle against the monster clawing its way to the surface. Run, the voice urged. Run before you hurt them, before you destroy everything you love. Keller stumbled into a narrow alley between two food trucks, bracing himself against the wall. His fingers scraped against the rough brick, already beginning to elongate into claws. He closed his eyes, concentrating with all his might on the image of Sarah's smiling face, trying to use it as an anchor against the tide of bestial rage threatening to overwhelm him. "Hey, are you okay?" The voice cut through his panic. Keller turned to see a young woman watching him with concern. He recognized her instantly, Arya Moon, the pop sensation headlining the festival. Her glitter-covered face was creased with worry. "You need to leave," Keller growled, his voice deepening as the change took hold. "It's not safe. Run. Can't you see the monster in front of you?" Arya took a step closer. "Let me help you. Do you need medical?" Her words cut off in a gasp as Keller's back arched, his muscles rippling and expanding beneath his shirt. He let out a guttural roar, the sound more animal than human. "No, no, no. Get away from me." But the words wouldn't come. The beast was taking over. As the transformation accelerated, Keller's last human thought was of his family, still out there in the crowd, unaware of the danger so close at hand. Then the beast surged forward, and Dr. James Keller was lost to the primal fury of the monster he had become. The alley echoed with Arya's scream as the creature lunged forward, setting in motion a chain of events that would forever change the lives of everyone involved. In the chaos that followed, Keller's consciousness flickered in and out like a faulty light bulb. Moments of horrifying clarity were interspersed with periods of bestial rage. He caught glimpses of blood, heard screams of terror, felt the sickening crunch of bones beneath his claws. "Stop," his human side cried out. "This isn't you. Fight it." Keller let out a howl of anguish that was both human and bestial, blended with the cheers of the concert. The sound echoed through the night, a cry of pain, guilt, and self-loathing that seemed to shake the very foundations of the earth. "Please," his fading human consciousness begged. "Don't do this. We can still stop." But the beast was beyond reason now. It had tasted freedom, and it hungered for more. Keller stumbled out of the alley, his eyes wild and feral. The festival grounds had erupted into chaos, screams filling the air as people fled in terror. But to Keller's transforming mind, they weren't people anymore. They were prey. With a roar that shook the very ground, Keller gave in to the beast. His body contorted, muscles bulging and bones cracking as he grew in size. Clothes tore away, revealing a hide of coarse fur. His face elongated into a muzzle filled with razor-sharp teeth. "This isn't me," Keller's human side whimpered, but the voice was growing fainter, drowned out by the beast's primal hunger. The creature that had once been Dr. James Keller bounded into the crowd, claws slashing and jaws snapping. Blood sprayed through the air as he tore through fleeing festival-goers. Each kill only fueled his bloodlust, driving him to greater acts of violence. Somewhere in the back of his mind, Keller screamed in horror at what he was doing. But that voice grew fainter with each life he took, drowned out by the beast's primal hunger. "Stop," Keller's humanity cried out. "This isn't who we are." "This is exactly who we are now," the beast replied. "This is freedom. This is power." In the midst of the carnage, he caught a familiar scent. Emily and Sarah. The last shred of his humanity cried out, begging him to stop. But the beast was too strong. He found them huddled behind an overturned food truck, terror etched on their faces. Emily stood protectively in front of Sarah, her eyes wide with disbelief as she recognized the monster before her. "James?" she whispered, her voice trembling as she recognized something still in his eyes. "Oh God, is that you?" The beast hesitated for a moment, some fragment of recognition flickering in its savage eyes. Keller's consciousness surged forward, fighting desperately for control. "Emily. Sarah. Run. Please, run." He tried to scream, but no words came out. But then Sarah whimpered in fear, and the sound triggered something in the creature's predatory brain. With a snarl, it lunged forward. No! Keller screamed inside his own mind, but it was too late. He felt his claws rake across Emily's chest, heard Sarah's cries cut short. And then, mercifully, everything went black. When awareness returned, Keller found himself kneeling in a pool of blood, surrounded by the broken bodies of festival-goers. The realization of what he had done crashed over him like a tidal wave of guilt and horror. What have I become? He thought, staring at his blood-soaked hands. What kind of monster am I? In the distance, he could hear sirens approaching. You're beyond redemption now, the voice in his head taunted. You've become the very thing you feared. A monster. A killer. No, Keller thought desperately. There has to be a way back. There has to be. But even as he thought it, he could feel the beast stirring within him, hungry for more violence. And he knew with a sinking feeling of despair that this was only the beginning. As the police lights illuminated the carnage around him, Keller let out a howl of anguish that was both human and bestial. The sound echoed through the night, a cry of pain, guilt, and self-loathing. In that moment, Dr. James Keller, brilliant scientist, loving father, and now unwitting monster, knew that his life as he had known it was over. The beast had won, and the world would never be the same. What now? His fading humanity asked. Now, the beast replied, we hunt. And with that, Keller disappeared into the shadows, leaving behind a world forever changed by the monster he had become.